Welcome to Extra Takes, hosted by Northland Church Lead Pastor Dr. Joshua Laxton. Join us each week as Pastor Josh reveals the rest of the story behind his sermons. We'll discuss how those who follow Christ can live out a biblical vision for the church in our world today.
Well, hello, Northland family and friends. Welcome to another episode of Extra Takes. I'm your co-host, PJ, along with Matthew Shiles.
We're a little lonely this week. There's only two of us.
Was there? Oh, that's right.
Last week, remember?
Last week we did have a party on stage.
So there were 7 of us last week. So if you didn't get a chance to listen or watch, we would encourage you to.
Yep.
It was the state of Northland, and we had several leaders talking about the 4 C's and just kind of where we are. So got some really good feedback of you that listened and watched. So make sure, if you missed it, make sure you head back there and watch it.
Yeah, that's great, because I actually saw there's quite a few views on YouTube, more so than in some sense in our normal Extra Take. So I was greatly surprised to see that, because yes, to have all of our leaders, particularly in the senior areas of leadership, talk about the C's and how it's going and the challenges that we still face, like, it was great.
Yes. So today we're talking about the kickoff of the T.E.D series. So this is a church in a divided democracy. These are theological educational discourses. We're doing these every June, or at least every summer.
Every summer, yeah. Depending on how my calendar shakes out, yeah, and what I'm covering, because obviously I wanted to cover every single one of these particular messages, because it really, like, these messages, I don't know if people realize this is, when I say it's in my wheelhouse, I mean, I have studied deeply these things since my PhD days. And so I started my PhD in 2010, finished in 2015. So we're almost 10 years removed from that. So for 15 years, I've been actually thinking deeply. Now, and so I'll just kind of dive in before you even ask a question, because I was talking to some staff earlier today about this. Is basically I showed people how a missionary would engage culture, is actually what I showed you. Because yes, so I am a missiologist, meaning my expertise is in the mission of God, but more specifically in terms of my dissertation was how the mission of God would engage a North American landscape. So really a divided democracy. Yeah. And so what I basically framed out this past weekend is that when you are a missionary going into a foreign territory, you need to understand the territory in which you're going. Yeah. And so basically I showed you in the first part is, okay, from a missionary point of view, when you look at over the last 150, 200, really 300 years, I took some big pieces of data and I framed them out into the challenges of what we are facing in terms of a divided society. And in some sense, based upon history and a lot of research, what are some turning points, or what are some data points that have led to that division? And then I came back and I explained how the church, based upon the mission of God, is to engage that that land. So basically I actually explained how the church is to be like a missionary in any area in which you go to.
Incredible. And you did that over 2 talks, so 2 TED Talks. These are, 20 to 25 to 30 minutes?
Yeah. I mean, that's why, now Saturday was kind of funny.
It's a different story.
Saturday was probably over an hour, between both talks, probably.
I think they were good.
Yeah, I mean, I thought, some people had to make a dinner reservation.
Keep going, come on. They were eating it up.
This would have been, what I have really enjoyed, basically taking each part and in some sense making it an 45-minute or an hour lecture. Yes, because I could have gone, and that's where Extra Takes is for. We get to talk about it a little bit more.
You
but
probably had enough content.
Yeah, I mean, because, to drill down in some of those numbers, some of those data points, right. I mean, that's where you would have spent a little bit more of the time, right? Or even the explanation of some things. So, but nevertheless, yes, so about 20, 25 minutes, part 1, part 2. And again, I gave you a general overview this past week.
So as a reminder, those two were, the first one was a divided democracy, and the second one was how does the church engage well? So under the divided democracy, we talked about where we are and then how did we get here. We talked about those five ways we got there. And then the second talk was how does the church engage well? And it was those three main areas, the robust missiology, a rough eschatology, and a rudimentary understanding of government. And then you concluded with 5 do's and 5 don'ts, which I really liked the don'ts. They were great, and we'll get to those. So before we dig in, because I know you guys see this wall in front of us, so Pastor Josh promised that we would cover several things in Extra Take. So as I'm listening, because I did the commissionings this weekend, I was sitting in on all 3. I guess I sat in on 2, and then I watched the 11 o'clock this morning. So anytime I hear, hey, we're doing this on Extra Takes, I perk up. So several things that we need to cover, and one of them is the resources. So he brought some of his resources with him. But before we get to that,
just some. I mean, that's the crazy part. Like, my bag could only fit these.
So before we dig in here, I want to just give us a quick, and you did this a little bit, but why do we do these TED series, the theological educational discourses? Like, why is it important for us to do this on an annual rhythm?
Yeah, so every summer I do 2 particular series, but they are within a larger understanding of cultural engagement. How does the church engage the culture in which we live? And so, and I actually think, and really, I think even from this first weekend, just even some of the feedback is that, I mean, many churches don't talk about this. I mean, sure, some churches do. Some churches are actually more partisan than they should be. And so I don't think they talk about it in a healthy manner or in even a Christocentric manner. And then I do think that we do need to think deeply. We are living in divided times. And so we do need to think deeply about how does the Bible, how does the Lord want us to engage the world in which we live. So I think that's why these TED series are really so important. It gets us thinking about that. It introduces, themes and topics that sometimes we're not just going to, automatically come through, which I will say, like in our Acts series, where I, concluded that series with, some general overview principles that we learned from Paul. Like so the gospel engaged culture where, sometimes he put people out of business. And then those people got ticked off at him. And then there were times where, the believers were told to shut their mouth, don't speak about Jesus. They're like, well, we can't. So you did have these elements of civil disobedience. You also had these elements where the gospel does engage culture and yes, where the gospel does bring about some transformation in a city, it also brings about opposition. And so you actually see it, but this way I get to tailor it specifically in a message that gives some language to things so that when we go through Acts or other places, we can kind of see how these elements are engaged or seen within a passage. And we'll see that throughout the series too.
Yeah. So these principles that we're learning, they will carry on.
They should carry on, but it will give you a framework that you can now kind of come back to, because I do think that these will be, when I say what we call evergreen, in the sense, come back, these principles are going to be there, in the passages that we will look at. I mean, they're not going to change. Yeah,
awesome. Okay, so let's talk about the resources. You said you would bring some. You brought...
Okay. All right, we'll start with this one, Culture Wars. So James Davison Hunter wrote Culture Wars. So he's actually the one who coined the term Culture Wars. So this came out in 91, 92. And he's a sociologist. He teaches still teaches at the University of Virginia. I mean, he is a scholar on these things. And what he talks about is that there's this competing vision in America, and that we cannot agree on now the future of America. So that's Culture Wars. Now, he also wrote a book which my dissertation is actually based upon. And I actually showed you this, and this is To Change the World. And the subtitle is The Irony, Tragedy, and Possibility of Christianity in the Late Modern World. So To Change the World, and where he talked about how Christians have at least tried to engage culture, and that was that defensive against, it was the relevance to, the purity from. So he talks about three major kind of Christian camps and how they have tried to engage culture to change culture for the good. And what he outlines in there, which is really good, is that, like the moral majority. Now, again, and I hope people realize that I wasn't trying to be mean or derogatory to anything or any kind of camp. I was just trying to explain the facts. Like even the Burger King sociology, which we'll talk about probably here in a little bit. Like I was just trying to outline this is the rub right now.
Yeah.
But the defensive against posture really kind of comes from more of a moral majority type of posture, because many people would have said in the 90s, early 2000s, when they started to see these culture wars, that we need to elect politicians who will go and vote the values.
Yeah.
And that's the way we will change culture.
Right.
That it will in some sense reclaim or will regain ground that we lost. And so we gotta make sure that we are putting saved politicians or politicians who share our values into political power positions to, in some sense, make sure we vote on our values. So therefore, to, in some sense, put these politicians in these places, they're like, well, we need to evangelize. So we need to evangelize the culture where they have a change of heart, and it will change their vote in the booth. Okay, well, that hasn't happened. I mean, you actually can kind of even see that in some of the numbers that I showed. Like
how many years? I mean, that how long has this strategy been going on? You said that hasn't happened.
Well, I mean, so decades, the moral majority came out in the 70s, 80s. So if you look at it, probably in the next 20, 30, the last 20, 30 years, I mean, in some sense, that kind of strategy implemented. Yeah. And what we're also seeing, and you also see this over the last 30 years, the church has declined. So we haven't done a really good job evangelizing. So that's kind of been part of it, is that so we've not done a good job evangelizing, reaching lost people. So in some sense, we don't even know if it works per se. You know what I'm saying? Like we don't necessarily know, because we've lost ground in terms of just a presence, of a religious presence. Yeah, so that was the defensive too, the defensive against posture. Then you had the relevance too, which was, that aligns more with the social gospel movement. Well, that's the way we'll change culture. We'll just change culture by doing good in the city, meeting needs, healing people, all of that, and we'll change the culture that way. Well, the culture's still pretty bad, pretty divided. And it's actually even less moral now than it was. It's almost what you could call amoral, because we have no moral standard anymore. So if you have no moral standard, then it's just amoral. There's no morality because there's no standard anymore. So in some sense, the relevance too hasn't worked, because we have now, in that camp, they've just accommodated, acquiesced to culture. And then you have the purity from. And I think, now Hunter was a little harsh on the people that he was talking about, but nevertheless, there is a mindset where we're just not even going to engage. I mean, we're going to focus on the church. We're going to focus on what it actually kind of means to be the people of God. We'll be salt, light, and we'll invite people over to our camp. We just won't even engage. But this is where he talks about the faithful presence theology. And he doesn't spend a lot of time, which is why I had to write a dissertation, because what does it look like in practice? Because he doesn't talk about what it looks like in practice. So that's why I had to do that. So that's where I took what he articulated, because I had seen through all of my other studies, he's kind of onto something of these at least big frameworks of how Christians have tended to engage culture. Yeah. And that's what I wrote on. So that's that. Then you have confident pluralism, and this is just a book of how these are, in some sense, even non-believers. They're not even necessarily writing a Christian book, but how do we even make it now as a divided society? So confident pluralism, because I talked about how we were a pluralistic nation. So this is where we can have confidence that even in our kind of pluralism, well, we can have some solidarity there.
So we got 22 books. You going through all of them?
I'm going to go through some big ones. How about that? So, here's one, and this is another big one.
We did lay them all out for you, so if you wanted to take a screenshot and look them all up.
But the Fractured Republic is a big one. Again, doesn't write necessarily from a Christian point of view. Talks about more of the Fractured Republic. How did we become so fractured? Let me have that.
Oh, is this is the guy you?
That's the guy I quoted. So this is the guy that I quoted. Yuval Levine.
Yuval Levine.
Okay. Hand me that Triumph. Okay. So, and this is a good one because this is the history, in some sense, the first 300 years of Christianity and how the church actually triumphed over the Roman Empire. So you can actually read that because it actually, in some sense, lays out a fateful present. So I'm going to draw on that hugely because I actually think that what the early church did in the first 3 centuries is actually what is outlined in Jeremiah 29. So that's good.
And you have referenced this one quite often.
I have referenced that one quite often because it is a really go-to resource. Another book that is really helpful, and it was actually written by someone who at the time was not a believer, but his research led him to be a believer, even though he grew up in the church. But it's called Dominion, How the Christian Revolution Remade the World. And so what he's talking about is how the church has so influenced Western society that we don't even know the extent of how the church influence Western society.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why I gave the graph the way I did, where you had Judeo-Christian values and the Enlightenment. I mean, it's clearly there, the Judeo-Christian value. I even, highlighted in the 11 o'clock, Creator is highlighted. It is uppercase. I mean, they did understand that there was a Creator, that human beings were made in the image of. I mean, and you can't get around that, Anywho, so those are just some books that I, would just direct your attention to if you wanted to read. Oh, the last book, because this is really, really important. So as I'm putting the books back up so people can take a screenshot. But this is one, it's called Body Politics. John Howard Yoder. Now, the reason why I think that's important, and there's so many other books that mention this too. But if you go back to Aristotle, what I referenced with Aristotle is that government is supposed to work for the flourishing of the city-state. Well, so this idea of politics is the way a society is ordered. Like, it's basically the public life of that society. So what I want you to realize is that the church is actually a politic within a politic. Because the Bible Jesus talks about this, that we are a city on a hill. So in Greek, city, polis. So the church is its own politic. It's its own city-state where the rule and reign of God is in operation. But while we maintain our distinctiveness as our own politic under the rule and reign of God, we do work for the common good of the larger common politic, the kingdom of man. And so when somebody says, well, the church shouldn't be engaged in politics, the very existence, and I'll show this in the next weekend that's coming up, the very existence of the church is a politic. It's a politic. It's showing how we engage every sphere of life.
Wow.
So that's why I think that one's good, because it's 5 practices of basically Christian community before the watching world. So the world is watching us, how we engage in a body politic of how, again,
the body in terms of community, not our personal body.
Exactly. Yeah. The body of the church.
Yeah.
How the church engages in life. And how the watching world should see the distinctiveness of how we engage in that life. And then there are going to be things that we work with the larger community for the common good, for the glory of God. But because again, there are going to be things that we will definitely be working for, because based upon who the Lord is and what He wants us to do, we're going to be working for the common good, for the flourishing. We'll see that in the last message of this series in Jeremiah 29, that they're going to partner with Babylon. and we'll let that sink in. But that's just a good. So the church by its very existence is a politic within a politic. And so, but the thing that I want people to realize, though, is that God has never commissioned His church to enforce and to force the church's politic onto the politic of the larger society.
Yeah, that's been a running theme that you want to keep driving home.
And I want to keep driving home because, this is interesting because there are some. One of the hang-ups that some non-believers have about the church is that they're going to look at the church when the church had power. Mm-hmm. Around the 4th, 5th century, basically all the way through until modern day. And they're going to see abuses. And you're right, there are abuses throughout history, but I want you to but again, this is a bigger framework of how to understand it. But you have to understand that the church also came out of a culture that's the way you ran things. That is the way you ran government, is that you force people into basically submission to your values, in some sense, your authority. And that's what has, in some sense, that is what has been done since the civilization of man. The only, I would say, and there are caveats to it, but you take the Jewish state, even in the Old Testament, they came and conquered the land, but once they got the promised land, and people would say, well, why? Well, God is just this, in the Old Testament, He's a different God than the New Testament. No, He was using Israel to judge the nations of the promised land. I can't go into all of that. But anyway, So once they get into the promised land, but they're not conquering. Like this promised land was a very small piece of land. So it's not like they're infiltrating the entire world and making them a theocracy under Yahweh. And then, but all of these other nations, there was always constant war. And then that's where you then have the rise of the superpowers with Egypt, and then the Assyrians, then the Babylonians, then the Medes, then the Persians, then the Greeks, then the Romans. And then, you have what is happening in Asia. And I don't know all of the different clans and tribes that, are trying to conquer those, those main territories over there. But what I'm trying to, express is that through the history of civilization is that the one who has had power, they dominate and they control. And many times they will force the subordinate to follow and to be, assimilated into their framework. Okay, so when the church is in some sense kind of been in that kind of culture for millennia, and then they now come into power, you're bound to see those who abuse the power because they relapse back into what has in some sense been ingrained into fallen humanity, and then you see some that actually use power for the good, and that's and I didn't bring the book with me, but I've referenced it before. But Bullies and Saints. That actually shows the bullies that kind of abuse power, saints that kind of use power, that they try to get the power right. So all of that to say, I understand where some non-Christians would say, well, the church has abused power. They have, because they have relapsed back into more of this domination. But and that's where I always tell the church, Jesus did not gain dominion over the world by forcing the world to acquiesce to Him, but by sacrificing Himself, loving them.
Right.
And so now when He comes back a second time, He's coming by force. But in this time, it is the time and the period of grace, time and period of mercy, of love, where His rule and reign is advancing not through force, but by love. Wow. And so that's what I've really wanted to stress, because that has all bearings on how we engage culture today as a church.
Oh, that's so good. So if you're listening, I'd encourage you pop over to YouTube and at least get a screenshot of these 22 books. You guys that are listening and watching, you love to learn more. So I would challenge you, what's one of these books that you can dig deeper into? For me, the Triumph of Christianity and Body Politics, both of those are ones that I'm going to look to dig into.
Yeah.
So next question about the Pew Research. You talked about the ideological consistency scale. Can you go over some of those research questions?
Yeah. So you have you have two columns. One column is for conservative positions. The other column is for liberal positions. And so like a conservative position question was, government is almost always wasteful and inefficient. Because many times, conservatives, they want smaller government. Yep. So the bigger the government, then the more wasteful they think they are. Government, another question is, government regulation of business usually does more harm than good. So again, they want free enterprise, free market. They want less restrictions. The government today can't afford to do much more to help the needy. So so they're in that kind of meritocracy. Like, man, listen, you need to pull your pants up. You need to put your boots on and go to work. So it's going to be more of a conservative mindset. The best way to ensure peace is through military strength. Most corporations make a fair and reasonable amount of profit. So those are conservative positions. Liberal positions would be, government often does a better job than people give it credit for. Government regulation of business is necessary to protect public interest. Racial discrimination is the main reason why many black people can't get ahead these days. Good diplomacy is the best way to ensure peace. So they in some sense, they're not necessarily going to be for military strength. No, they're for diplomacy. Business corporations make too much profit. I mean, so these are some liberal positions. I'll give you the last two, one conservative, one liberal. Homosexuality should be discouraged by society. Homosexuality should be accepted by society. So you got the conservative view. And so when you look at how respondents have responded to these questions, the gap has grown. So now we are more divided ideologically. So we're not as close as we once were. That is significant. That has been an ideological shift that has become now polarizing.
And you showed from
1994, where it started,
2017,
which is the latest. Like, we don't know where it is now in 2020, 2024.
2020 would look like, or 2024.
No. And I tried to find that graph, couldn't find it.
Yeah, I would guess that they would be getting further apart. Yeah. That slide, all of those questions are in all the slides. On the Bible app.
So then you could go back and listen to the first part of the talk to see those slides again. And I'll just stress that's the median Democrat and the median Republican. So this is your mid-range Republican or your mid-range Democrat. So this is not
talking about the extremes.
We're not talking about the extremes. We are talking about the median. That's what. So you know what I'm saying.
Well, and I think what that and a lot of this first talk helped us understand is why things feel so off. Right?
Yeah. Why
things feel so crazy. I thought it was interesting. Just your position and your posture going into this. This is just kind of an aside, but you said, I'm not nervous, right? But I think that showed you weren't coming into this making political statements. You were coming into it making biblical statements, right? And you had a deep conviction.
Yeah, because I would say the first part wasn't necessarily biblical as much as it was sociological in the sense of trying to identify, and then also knowing, though, I mean, obviously as what I would term an evangelical Christian.
Yeah.
But having, obviously studied and researched the different waves of denominations, and then in some sense the 18th and the 19th and 20th century, so 1800s, 1900s. Yeah. I can speak confidently. Like, and the reason why I wasn't nervous is like, it's not like I studied this for the last week. You know what I'm saying? So it's not like, because I understand that a lot of, and it's not a bad thing, but I understand a lot of pastors couldn't be as confident putting those things together. They'll have to bring in an expert to do it. I just happen to be somebody who has studied this actually fairly deeply for the last 15 years.
That's great. Okay, so a question of clarification. This one could go quickly. When you were talking about the marginalized church, specifically at the 11, you said a marginalized church, conservative Christians feel we are marginalized because we are.
Yeah.
So when you said conservative, did you mean theologically or politically?
Both. I mean, in some sense, they I don't want to say that they're one and the same, but they tend to be the same.
I mean, there's a difference there.
There is a difference between political conservatives and theological conservatism. Mm-hmm. But here's what you would see with conservative theology. You would actually have different strains politically. But they're not going to. But in some sense, they're not going to tend to lean left, other than socially, of how we meet needs.
Right.
They're not even so conservative. Theologians or people who are conservative theologically, they're not going to be for gay marriage.
Right.
Okay, so they're not they're not going to be where the public so that's where I want to say sure, there's going to be some caveats, there's going to be some differences, but if you are conservative theologically, you're going to tend to lean conservative politically. But this is part of where and if you don't, and so this is where I'll speak. So the graph on how evangelicals identify with each party by race.
Yes.
Okay. So white evangelicals, about 50% going to be Republicans, but black evangelicals are about 70% are going to be with Democrats. Okay. Your Hispanic evangelicals, they're kind of towing the line of independent. Okay. They can go one way or the other. So this is where let me speak to white Republicans, and then in some sense black Democrats who are evangelicals. This is where on that last, on that kind of last slide of don'ts.
Yeah.
Okay, listen, I'm not telling you I'm not telling you got to be a Republican or be a Democrat. I would actually want you to be a child of God. And so therefore, don't be silent when the Republican Party is out of line and when your candidate or your politicians are out of line, because the Republican Party is not perfect. Same thing with the Democrat Party. Listen, I'm telling you, there are a lot of things that the Democrat Party that they stand for that really is evil, that really is not honoring to the Lord. Because one of the things that I did write in my notes and just didn't get to it, but the psalmist writes is that righteousness exalts a nation, and wasn't even talking about just Israel as a nation, but righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. So this is where call out Republicans for their sin, and also call out Democrats for their sin. So for my black evangelicals, I would say make sure you call out, if you're going to be a Democrat, call out the Democratic Party for their evils. Like abortion is evil. Call it out. Republicans, listen, and so I didn't. So this past week, do not discount the sin of an individual. Okay, so you can sit there and say that was, you sit there and by all appearances, let's just say, I'll just give it to you, that the criminal justice system seemingly abused power. Okay, but don't discount the man's character. I mean, this is a man, he's not denying it. He paid a prostitute to be quiet. So but don't sweep that under the rug, because what are we saying when again, I'm talking about Christian. Like if you're a Republican, don't know Jesus, do whatever do whatever you want. I don't care. I really don't, because there's no standard that you have that you're operating by. But if you are a Christian and you operate by the standard of Jesus, we have to maintain our posture of distinction.
Yeah.
And so that's just where I'm just saying, and again, I'm trying to navigate, because I do believe that this is what Jesus would do. Navigate the messy middle.
This is the messy middle.
And call out both sides.
And the Republican or Democratic Party, that's not the kingdom of God.
No.
And we know that. That sounds ridiculous, but we have to remind ourselves of that, because we have to push what you're saying. We have to push against it, and it's stronger when we can call out our own party.
And we call, all right. So because this is extra takes and it's not the stage, because I would not say this on a stage. what I'm about to say. I'm going to give you a little bit more commentary of how we try. And again, I'm not saying that I'm right. So this is why I'm doing it at Extra Takes, and I'm not doing it on the stage.
Because this is a different audience.
This is a different audience, and I want us to wrestle more, with things. Okay. Yeah. All right, so let's take gay marriage. So redefining marriage. I am not for redefining marriage. And I don't think from a societal standpoint we ought to have been for redefining marriage. Mm-hmm. Because again, once you redefine one institution, I mean now, and that's why I said you open up Pandora's box, now you can redefine anything, and we are. Because now we've redefined marriage, so now we can redefine gender. Oh, gender now is a social construct, so you can declare whatever you want to be. And I think that is absolutely a dangerous thing that a society would do, and I think is ultimately detrimental to individuals. I actually believe that. And yes, from a biblical standpoint, absolutely, but even from a cultural standpoint, absolutely. Okay, but then I want to go back though and go, okay, well, I am for, because I got to go back to, and this is why I put up that graph, Enlightenment values and Judeo-Christian values. Yeah. So I am for, so I want to, in some sense, be for a pluralistic nation, even though not everybody's going to be a Christian. And I don't want to force everybody to be Christian, because you can't force morality. But you can enforce rights. Okay? So if somebody, if you have homosexuals that actually want the right to see one another in a hospital, to be on an insurance policy, to whatever it may be, is there a way? And again, is there a way to give them rights without redefining the institution? I think there was, but we missed that. And so that's part of the messy middle. And that's where, again, as Christians, that's part of the messy middle is how does the church maintain our distinction while also living in a pluralistic society where people can pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but within a society that's not going to change, in some sense, institutional values, but in some sense afford some rights to individuals. So, and again, I'm not speaking definitively about that, but I am not for redefining an institution. But was there a way to give rights to people who wanted to adopt that lifestyle?
Yeah, that is a
wonderful
example of the messy middle.
Yeah, because it's a pluralistic society.
Because you just start going down that road of the conversation, and people get a bit.
Yeah, and that's what I'm doing on the Extra Takes. And don't send me an email, tell me how wrong I am. Listen, I'm still thinking deeply about these issues. I think you ought to. But here's another one: is like, all right, so for the first 200 plus, really 200 and maybe 10, 15, 20 years of our existence, we didn't have Muslims coming in. Okay, now we have Muslims coming in. They want to build a mosque. Well, there are many areas where Christians are trying to shut down mosque being built. Okay, listen, if we live in a pluralistic society, you cannot have in some sense the stance. Well, a church can have the right to build basically a nonprofit structure on land, and nonprofit mosque can't.
Yeah.
Like, we live in a pluralistic society.
Yeah.
And so you have to figure out how, and this is where I think some of these books like Confident Pluralism, The Fractured Republic, we have to think deeply, and that's why I wanted to show we were not a Christian nation. Yeah. And you can disagree with me, but I'm telling you, you can look at the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights, and yes, you have Judeo-Christian values embedded, but not the enforcement of the Christian religion. And so that's where I wanted to try to maintain this tension that America was birthed out of, but we have lost that tension, and I get that. And so we really do need to reclaim some of that tension, while the church still maintains her distinction without trying to force people to be Christian. And that's really tough.
Wow. Good conversation. Okay, so speaking of thinking deeply, between the first and the second talks, we did a poll.
Yep.
Which of these areas do you think you know best? So I'll give you the numbers for the 11 o'clock. Yeah. So missiology, eschatology, political philosophy, and it's all Greek to me. Missiology, 13%. Eschatology, 7%. Political philosophy, 18%, and it's all Greek to me, 59%. What did you expect?
I don't know. I just didn't. Yeah,
Did you expect these results?
I didn't know. I didn't expect all Greek to me being over 50 in all of them.
I knew all Greek to me was going to be the highest. I didn't know they would be that high.
I didn't know they would be that high. I mean, but eschatology, I mean, sure. I think that's why some people, really want me to do a series on Revelation.
I think
it would be very disappointing in what I would say, though.
I think so, too. But I thought eschatology would be higher.
Yeah. And the missiology, I know I don't use that word, but I talk about mission all the time. All the time. So, my goodness. So
that was fun. But what was great was I saw what you did there, because those three connected to how the church engages well.
Yeah.
Robust missiology, rough eschatology, and a rudimentary understanding of government. So did you want to talk more about the rough eschatology, the four views?
Well, yeah, I just kind of mentioned it, like the four views. You got premillennialism that is divided into basically two subcamps, which one is what they would call dispensationalism, and then the other would be historic. And so that basically, and just know this, eschatology, these views have everything to do with the millennial reign of Christ. Like, when is he coming to? And here's the thing: the millennial reign is different than Revelation 21, where he's bringing the new city down. So and that's why everybody's so, in some sense, divided.
And is that why you said he doesn't come back a second and a half time?
Well, so all right, so I'll just tip my, have I ever said what I am here? I can't remember.
I think you said amillennial.
I think I have said I was more in the amillennial camp.
Because we have talked about it, and as you were going through them, I was trying to remember. I think that's what you said.
Okay, so and I'll just tell you why. And I'm giving you these really big, kind of emphasis. All right, so premillennialism would say that Jesus is going to come back and set up his millennial kingdom for 1,000 years, and this is again before the new city comes. In all honesty, I just cannot rack my brain around the idea of how that even is feasible. And again, I'm very simple-minded, and there are a lot of smarter people than me that believe in, premillennialism, but that there's going to, and premillennialism would have the rapture in it, and so the rapture. And again, depending on whether you're a dispensationalist or you're a historic premillennial, you would think some would say that the rapture is going to happen before the tribulation, so you're pre-trib. Some people think that the rapture will happen mid-trib, and then some people believe that the rapture will happen post-trib, and then the millennial king. So it gets really convoluted. It really does. But again,
but for some, it's very, very important.
And also, here's another thing that I think is really important, because premillennialism would actually have a focus on Israel as a nation. So this is why some people have been taught an eschatology, but they don't know what it is, which is why they are. And again, I'm not saying that we're not pro-Israel, but what I'm saying is that, premillennialism would see 1948 as the fulfillment of prophecy. Mm-hmm. Other people would not in that camp. Mm-hmm. And that does not mean that they don't love Jesus and that they are not scholars and that they don't know their Bible, okay? So this is where eschatology is a tertiary issue, but what I'm trying to tell you is that eschatology does influence the way you engage culture.
Well, in whether we realize it or not, some posts on Facebook posting about Israel, you're actually pushing a certain eschatological
You actually are pushing,
without realizing it.
Yeah. Because now you get into, the future of Israel. Mm-hmm. Does the future of Israel, is it a nationalistic future, or is it just an ethnic future, or do they even have a future? That's all answered in eschatology.
Yeah.
Did the church replace Israel?
Yeah.
And so, And again, I have a position on that, but that's part of where, and I do lean more on millennial after having researched everything. That I do believe that the millennial reign of Christ is more a spiritual reign, that He is reigning, He's ruling and reigning through His church. Now, I think there could, and again, I'm just going to throw this out here just to poke the bear just a little bit, okay? Just because, again, I'm still thinking deeply about this, and can I change? I could. So I'm not, but after having studied this deeply for the last 15, 20 years, this is the camp that I'm falling in. But I think there could even be an argument made where He, in some sense, ruled and reigned through His church for 1,000 years, when the church became the primary center of government around the 4th or 5th century, up until it began to fragment it about 1,000 years later. So, but I mean, if you really wanted something like concrete, but I think more so though that the millennial reign of Christ is not a fixed 1,000-year reign, but it is more of a spiritual reign that isn't a fixed 1,000 years, and He's ruling and reigning through His church until He brings until He brings the new city, and then that's where. But then this is the reason why I can't get my head around kind of premillennialism. If Jesus comes back only 2 times, and He comes back to set up His millennial reign. Okay, does He got to go back to heaven? And this is the question I have. Does He go back to heaven and then come back? Well, that means He comes back 3 times. Or does He call from earth? That's what, again, those are things, because I know things that are clear. And there is this clarity. I mean, and we see this in Acts, is that the angel says that, well, why are you looking up? The same person who went away will come back. And the church is absolutely in one accord on this. He only comes back 2 times. Yeah. So nevertheless, this is where I'm saying, have fun. And this is where I would want to say, have fun with eschatology in the details. Okay, I say have fun. Please don't be militant about it. And sometimes people who want to be militant about it, they're going to in some sense look at everything that is happening in the world, is Vladimir Putin the beast? I mean, please don't do. I actually don't do that. I don't think that's helpful. I really don't think that's helpful. So, because what Revelation ultimately was about was a living hope that wasn't supposed to scare the living daylights out of the church. It really wasn't. It was supposed to be a living hope that, hey, even though things are bad, and that's the thing I want to say, is that another thing about eschatology is a lot of times, particularly Americans, we want to think of eschatological views through a white Westerner viewpoint. And here's the thing. There are other people, in the last 2,000 years, a lot of Christians have gone through tribulation. There are Christians right now on planet Earth that it is a tribulation for them. They are being persecuted, they are being imprisoned, they are losing their life because of their faith in Jesus. So when we talk about, well, the rapture is going to happen so that we don't suffer, please don't do that, because you actually downplay everybody else's suffering, every other Christian suffering in 2,000 years. And don't miss this too, is that in the last 50 years there have been more persecuted Christians on planet Earth than in the last, I would say 2,000 years since the church was birthed, in the last 50 years. So please don't discount other Christians suffering. When you say, "Oh, we won't suffer," the rapture will happen. Then you're actually kind of clueless about what's going on in the world in the church. Sorry, I didn't mean to be that blunt.
Well, if you're looking for a good resource for that, Open Doors USA puts out an annual list called the World Watch List, the top 50 persecuted nations, and you can go on the website, download that list. You can have all sorts of opportunities to pray.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's let's talk about this quote. You said the church's engagement can be the difference between an incremental revival in American democracy or an inflamed revolution.
Ooh. Yeah. What you want to know about that?
That's one of those, I just want to lay it out and see what you say. You said we should be the ones that are diffusing the dumpster fire that is. That's why we need to learn to engage well. That, I want you to talk about that quote because that quote really scared me a bit. It really elevates the importance of what we're doing here.
So here's what I actually think. I looked at. I showed you some of those. Showed us some of those articles about Civil War.
Yeah.
So I actually think that we're living in a cultural cold Civil War. So the cold Civil War between the Soviet Union and the U.S. We were just in some sense always on edge, waiting for tensions to arise.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, and then there were certain times where it was more heightened sensitivity than others. I think like even the Cuban Missile Crisis. I think that was part of the Cold War, if I'm not mistaken. If I am, just let me know.
Yeah. When was that? Was that before us?
It was definitely before our time. Okay. Yeah, it was before our time.
70s, 60s?
Yeah.
Okay.
But that's where I try to know history too, But so I actually think we're living in a cold Civil War. Because here's the other things too, in terms of a Civil War, is and somebody was telling me about the militia and all of that in these states. Let me tell you, the militias have nothing on the federal government military. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, so I don't think we're going to see a civil war like that. But will there be more, in some sense, violence? Will there be more violent, uncivil type of protest? I mean, yes, and so that's where there's these flamed intentions. Or kind of these inflamed revolution type things like we'll continue to see more like January 6th type thing. I mean, we called it an insurrection, or I say people did. Okay, so yes, I think that there is very much a possibility you could start seeing more so those things in cities potentially. I'm not going to throw it off the table because we saw it in January 6th, 2021. But that's where the church, I mean, we still have, oh gosh, I forget the number, but I mean, tens of millions, if you think that, we still have like a third of the population. We can diffuse things. And if we play the game according to the scriptures, we can infuse some things.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's where I'm just saying incremental revival in American democracy. I say incremental because we have to slowly work our way back to the middle.
Yeah.
Now in the 9 o'clock and the 11 o'clock, I did omit these, but I talked about the branches of government. And really why those branches of government were created. Those branches of government, the three branches of government, you have the executive, the judicial, and the legislative. They were created for checks and balances to prevent major swings. Because here's what we're seeing right now, because of the era that we are in and the polarization, is that we are swinging left, we are swinging right, and the culture is sick because we were never meant to swing like this. And so that's why I'm saying incremental revival in American democracy. And that does not mean, and I use the term revival because I think we kind of know what revival is. I'm not talking about, like, we want the church to experience revival, but I'm talking about an incremental revival of American history to try to bring back a balance between Judeo-Christian values and Enlightenment values. I actually think that. And again, could I be wrong? I could. But again, based upon what I know, my studies, and I think I'm trending in the right direction for an incremental, revival in American democracy. But if we continue to use warrior type language, inciting violence, or in trying not to have, in some sense, work within the systems. And I know that you're saying that, well, the systems don't work. Well, I mean, we're going to have to play the long game. All right, so I wanted to start out with this example, but I just didn't have any time. Okay, so in Simon Sinek's book called Infinite Games, he talks about the difference between finite games and infinite games. Mm-hmm. Finite games are like baseball, basketball, football. They're known players, they're known rules, and there's a beginning and an end, and there's an outcome. In infinite games, the players are unknown, the rules are unknown, and really the goal is to perpetuate, in some sense, the existence. Okay, so I want people to know that when it comes to American life, American democracy, the constitutional republic, it is a perpetual game. There should be, because here's the thing, when there are winners and losers, that's the reason why many of the founding fathers didn't even want a two-party system. They wanted one, because there should not be winners and losers in an American democracy, because there would always be a side that was a sore loser. And then they would want to fight because they didn't get what they want. But I also want to know, I want the church to know that we are in an infinite game. And because we don't know all of the players, we don't know all, in some sense, we do know all of the opponents, but we don't know we don't know where they're coming from.
Right.
Okay? But what are we trying to perpetuate? The advancement of the good news of King Jesus throughout the world through his church. So that's where we have, in some sense, two infinite games being played, and we have to be as wise as we possibly can, because these are complex times, these are complex issues. They're really not black and white; they're mostly gray. Yeah. And so that's where we have to think deeply about this, and what I say, play the long game.
Yeah.
And I know that's easier said than done. Because we have felt the rug. I say we. Many Christians and in some sense conservatives have felt the rug yanked out from underneath them. And yes, I understand that, and I would agree the rug has. But I don't think we win by trying to, in some sense, force people off their rug and throw them onto our rug.
Yeah, good point.
So
good point. So let's wrap up by looking at the 5 do's and the 5 don'ts. You like those, don't you? Okay.
Yeah.
The 5 don'ts. Don't become political pawns. Don't be politically naive. Don't weaponize the Bible for political gain. Don't be silent over your political party's failures and imperfections. And don't get sucked into playing the political game of resentment. Which of those do you want to talk about?
I would stress the don't become political pawns and don't weaponize the Bible for political gain. Yeah. And obviously resentment too.
Yeah.
But political pawns, and I said this at the 11, didn't say it in all others, but hey, we're not for sale.
That was really good, yeah.
The church should not be for sale. So, because that's what political pawns do. They're on the front lines, in some sense for sale type thing. Well, we're not for sale. We've already been bought with the price. And Jesus' blood bought our price. Bought our price. So we're not for sale. So we should not be political pawns. I don't think we ought to be I don't think we ought to weaponize the Bible for political gain. So I do have a problem. I'll just be honest. I have a problem with the Bible in some sense that Trump touted just recently. And it's the Bible wrapped up in the American flag. Please don't do that. I mean, I'm just
the one he's selling.
The one he's selling. Listen, we need to maintain the distinction. Okay, we need to maintain the distinction, because when you're wrapping the Bible in a flag, like you're making a statement that I just don't think is honoring Jesus. Now again, that doesn't mean you can't work for the common good. Doesn't mean that you can't be a it just means be very careful from incorporating America into the Bible and the Bible into America. They need to remain distinct, and I try to show that with the Judeo-Christian values and the Enlightenment, and in some sense that those two things came together. It wasn't the Christian faith and the Enlightenment coming together and creating a Christian nation. So you can disagree with me, and that's fine. And I still believe that we can attend. Because I still think we can attend church together, partner in God's mission. But I also want to say this: don't go to a politically partisan church, because that ain't Jesus. I'll just say it that way, because I'll be as strong as that ain't Jesus. And that's actually what happened during COVID. There were a lot of people that churches actually became partisan because of how divided things were. Yeah. And so you had Christians going to politically partisan churches. I don't think that is honoring to Jesus, because that actually goes against the whole idea of that there is no Jew nor Greek nor male or female nor slave nor free. Mm-hmm. And there is no Republican nor Democrat. But when you go to a partisan church and you're staking your claim on just one side of the political aisle, I'm telling you, that is not the vision of Jesus' church. So that's what I'm saying. I think even if you would disagree with some of my assessments, and again, I want to stress this, I will not stress these things on the stage. We will have these conversations here, because these are extra takes where you can hear a little bit more of how I'm wrestling with this. Sure, I might wrestle with them, in other environments that we might have here, but I will never wrestle with things that are not definitive on the stage. And if they're not definitive, I will clearly mark those out, like I'm still wrestling with this.
Sure.
Or here's the options.
Yeah.
So
that's great.
Yeah,
that's great.
But that's what I would just say about those.
So the 5 do's: do honor the emperor, in our case, democracy. Do work for the common good. Do let your faith inform and influence your public life. Do honor Jesus as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And do live in anticipation of Jesus' return and new creation.
Yep. So the thing I would just probably point out there is do honor the emperor, which is democracy, because again, you're trying to find the application. We don't have a Caesar. We don't have a king in terms of our cultural.
Does that not mean the president or our leader?
Well, I mean, so democracy would involve our 3 systems of government that we're gonna honor them.
All of it. Yeah.
Not
just the one leader, but
that's why I'm saying honor democracy, because in some sense, and that's why I love Abraham Lincoln's quote: "A government of the people, by the people, for the people." I may have gotten those backwards, but anyways, but it was of the people. So, but honor the system. And and here's the thing: are there problems within the system? Yeah. But let's seek to honor the system. And that's part of why I do feel like we do got to get back to the church. If we got to cultivate an understanding of how Christians engage. Like, I do want Christians, I do want Northlanders run for public office, run for local government, run for state government, run for federal government. Listen, I would hope and pray that we have some of the, we'll have the next Supreme Court justice come. Like, I want us to realize, because when we are, and here's the thing, I don't want us to cultivate disciples into these spheres to abuse power, but to use power for God's glory and the society's good. And I think that there's a way to do it, which is why I did end up putting up that, that kind of graphic where we're really feeling the rub is that the Enlightenment secular mentality now has people who adhere to that mindset in positions of power in every sphere of culture. Yeah. So what we've got to do as the church is that we have got to cultivate the next, well, in some sense, the now generation, the next generation, to understand how the Lord wants us to operate as believers in every realm of society, and we're sending them into business, and they're creating the next Fortune 500 company, or they're running the Fortune 500 company. That they're the ones creating arts and entertainment. They're the ones in the news media. And yes, is it hard? Is it messy to be a Christian and navigate that? But we can. How do you know that, Josh? Because read The Triumph of Christianity. It has happened. It has happened. And then the last thing that I would say is don't panic. And the reason why I would say don't panic is that the Christian faith can live, exist, and thrive in any kind of government. Well, how do you know that, Josh? Read The Triumph of Christianity. Look at even what the church is doing in the Middle East and China. The church can thrive. Individuals, and does that mean that that we won't suffer? No. I mean, it might mean that we would suffer, but in terms of the church living, existing, and thriving in any government and any culture, we have seen that in 2,000 years. We can do it. But
Amen.
I do believe that we have an opportunity, and this is why I am grateful to the Lord for America. For the American experiment, as many people refer to of it as, is that we as a in some sense as a church body, a collective church body, we actually have rights to engage our culture in these kinds of ways when many believers do not have those privileges. Yeah. So that's where I would say don't panic, trust the Lord, but also be wise and discerning.
All right. Week 1 down.
Week 1 down. Man, I'm tired.
3 more to go.
Here we go. 3 more to go. So, Northland family and friends, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Extra Takes. Hey, if you're watching this on YouTube, man, hit that like button and even share this. This would be probably a good one to share with people, particularly if you wanted to share the 2 messages with them. And then if you want to on any platform that you're listening to this as a podcast, write us a review. A good review, please. No, just joking.
5-star only.
5-star.
Is that the rule?
Yeah, 5-star only. 5-star only. Because we serve a 5-star Savior. We love you. Blessings.
Thanks for listening to Extra Takes. Be sure to follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts so you won't miss a single episode.